The birth of the musket, a strange new thunderstick. Ah, sit closer, child, and let these old bones tell you a tale. Back in the days when kings wore velvet cloaks and farmers still feared the winter hunger, there came into the world a weapon so curious, so loud, that it made even the bravest knight flinch at its roar. They called it the musket, though in truth it was but a rough descendant of older fire-spewing sticks. You see, before the musket, men had long relied upon sword and pike, upon bow and arrow, and those weapons, my dear, had fed empires for centuries. The English longbowman at Agincourt, deadly. The armored knight on his destria, near invincible, yet something new was stirring, and it came with smoke and fire. The musket was not born perfect. Oh no, far from it. Its grandfathers were clumsy tubes of iron strapped to wooden staves, things they called hand cannons. Imagine, if you will, a blacksmith's pipe stuffed with powder and lead, lit by a match cord and fired more by luck than by aim. They spat smoke and flame like the throat of a dragon, but more often they singed the user's beard than struck the enemy true. Still, men have always hungered for power, and power it was. By the early 1500s, these crude contraptions had grown into arquebuses, and from those, the musket was born. A musket was longer, heavier, and meant to be steadied upon a forked stick. Yes, imagine a soldier carrying not just his gun but a wooden prop to hold it steady. That was the burden of progress, and when he fired, oh heavens, the world seemed to crack. A puff of white smoke, a sulphurous stink, and the lead ball was loosed. Now, my child, you must understand how people saw this strange weapon. To the lords and generals, the musket was a key, a way to humble the knight in armor. For what good was a steel breastplate when a lead ball could punch through it? To the common man, though, the musket was both terror and salvation. You see, any farmer could be taught to pull a match to powder. Training a bowman took years of muscle and craft. Training a musketeer, weeks, if that. And so, peasants were turned into soldiers, armies swelled, and the old order of sword and lance began to tremble. But do not think it was easy. These early muskets were heavy as an ox's leg and slow as a sleepy mule. A man could scarcely fire 3 shots in a minute, and that only with nimble fingers and a steady hand. In battle, lines of musketeers would stand shoulder to shoulder, each with his smoldering match cord, waiting for the captain's cry. When the word came, "Make ready," the air grew tense. Matches touched powder, pans flashed, and the world erupted in thunder. Can you see it? Rows of men, the smoke so thick you could scarce tell friend from foe, the stench of brimstone burning your nostrils, the pounding in your ears as if God himself had clapped his hands. This was no gentleman's duel with polished blades. This was chaos, fire, and fear. Still, the musket carried with it a sort of grim magic. Villagers whispered of its power. Priests fretted that it was ungodly, a devil's invention. Knights cursed it, for their shining armor, once a wall of safety, was now little better than tin. And kings smiled, for they could raise vast armies of musketeers, cheap and numerous, to bend the world to their will. But let me tell you a little secret. In those days, the musket was as dangerous to the man behind it as to the one in front. Misfires were common. Powder flashed in the pan and left the ball still snug in its barrel. Sometimes the whole thing burst apart, tearing fingers and flesh. Many a musketeer bore scars on cheek and hand from an unfaithful weapon. A thunderstick, yes, but a fickle one. So it was. In the 16th and 17th centuries, that the musket grew from a curiosity into the very backbone of armies. It changed the face of war, though slowly, stubbornly, and at great cost. And in that change, my child, lies the heart of our tale. For to truly understand what it meant to shoot a musket, you must first understand the weight of history it carried, and the fear, the awe, the trembling hands of those who first dared to fire the dragon's breath. Loading and firing, the dance of fire and powder. Ah, now, child, this is where the story gets tricky, and a bit dangerous, mind you. For the musket, mighty though it seemed, was no simple stick to wave about. No, no. It required patience, skill, and a steady hand, for the musket's tongue was fire, and fire is a jealous companion. First came the powder. A soldier would reach into his leather powder flask, the spout narrow and exact, and pour the black granules into the barrel. One must measure carefully, for too much powder and the musket could explode in his hands, too little and the ball would not fly true. The powder hissed and rustled as it tumbled down the iron tube, and already the air carried a faint, acrid smell, the scent of danger. Next, the lead ball, heavy, round, and cold, was set atop the powder. Some soldiers wrapped it in a tiny piece of cloth called a wadding to hold it snug. With a ramrod long and smooth, the musketeer pushed the ball down the barrel until it sat tight against the powder. Pushed too hard, and one might drive it crooked, and the shot would stray or lodge. Pushed too softly, and the ball might jump free at the first flash. It was a dance, delicate as the steps of a bride, and yet deadly if misstepped. Then came the pan and the match cord. Ah, the match cord, a burning rope of hemp soaked in saltpeter, always glowing at the tip. One had to keep it alive, for a dying cord meant a misfire, and a misfire in the heat of battle could be fatal. The powder in the pan, a small cup beside the touch hole, was primed with care. Too much, and the pan would flare like a torch. Too little, and it might not ignite at all. Soldiers would check and recheck, their fingers blackened from soot, their eyes squinting through smoke already forming from the previous shots. And then the firing itself. Oh, child, that was a moment to remember. At the command of the officer, "Make ready!" Each musketeer raised his weapon. The match cord touched the pan, a tiny spark, a hiss, and then a deafening thunderclap that rattled teeth and shook the ground. Flames licked the barrel, smoke poured like a river of ghosts, and the lead ball streaked forward, sometimes with deadly accuracy, sometimes wayward, striking earth, tree, or unfortunate soldier. The recoil was another thing entirely. Muskets were heavy. Sometimes a stone tied to a stick might have been lighter. When the weapon roared, it jumped in the soldier's hands, shoved back into the shoulder, bruising and battering the flesh. A man could only fire a few times a minute if he were lucky, if he were quick, if he were careful. And careful one must be, for in the chaos of smoke, heat, and the cries of comrades, a misstep could cost a limb or worse. Reloading was a repeat of this perilous ritual over and over. Pour the powder, push the ball, prime the pan, light the match. By the third, fourth, fifth shot, fingers were raw, hands blackened, eyes streaming from smoke, ears ringing. But the soldiers endured, for survival demanded it, and victory, if it came, demanded more. And oh, the sounds! Do you know, child, that the first volley of muskets was like the voice of thunder itself? Each musket a storm cloud, each flash a bolt striking the earth, and the smoke, thick, white, stinging the eyes and nose, making the world a haze of confusion. Soldiers could scarcely see the man next to them, could scarcely tell friend from foe, yet still they aimed, Still they fired, still they prayed to survive. It was in this dance of powder, flame, and smoke that the musket earned its fearsome reputation. Peasants became soldiers, knights feared the common man, and generals learned that victory depended not just on courage, but on the precise rhythm of loading, firing, and reloading again. A soldier's skill was measured not in the swing of a sword or the shot of a bow, but in how swiftly, how carefully, how unerringly he could feed the hungry iron dragon that he carried. And yet, despite all this care, accidents happened. Muskets misfired, barrels cracked, flames burned fingers and faces. Some soldiers became so scarred that their faces bore testimony to the price of wielding such fire. Some lost limbs, some never fired again. The musket was both a tool and a treacherous companion, given a power yet demanding respect. But even in its danger, there was a strange beauty. To watch a line of musketeers fire in unison, the sparks, the flames, the rolling smoke, was like watching the heartbeat of war itself. There was rhythm, there was spectacle, and there was the awe of witnessing men bending fire to their will. And in that awe, the musket cemented its place in history, not just as a weapon, but as a symbol of change, the herald of a new age where skill, courage, and timing mattered as much as strength and armor. Yes, child, this is the way of the musket. Slow, heavy, dangerous, and magnificent all at once. And when you picture a soldier of old, know that behind every roar, every flash, every puff of smoke lies a tale of patience, fear, and the strange, terrible magic of fire and powder combined. The musket in battle, from smoke to fear. Ah, lad, now that we've spoken of how a musket was born from fire and powder, and how a man labored to load it with care, let us march together onto the battlefield, where these heavy dragons truly earned their name. For it was not enough that a single fellow could set powder aflame and send a ball hissing through the air. Nay, the musket was a beast that demanded brothers in arms, a line of men, and the courage to stand shoulder to shoulder while thunder rolled from their hands. Picture, if you will, a broad meadow just beyond dawn. The grass is damp, the mist rising low, and there upon the field stand two armies. Once upon a time, that meadow would have rung with the clash of swords and the pounding hooves of armored knights. But here, in the 16th century, a new sound fills the air, the barking order of captains and the heavy clatter of matchlock muskets raised in unison. The musketeers are arrayed in long lines, ranks as neat as rows in a farmer's field. Each man grips his weapon, awkward and heavy, yet held with a strange pride. Their officers cry out, "Make ready! Present! Fire!" And with that last word, the air is torn asunder. A wall of flame bursts forward, flashes dancing like lightning, followed by a deafening crack as dozens of muskets roar in unison. The smoke rolls thick and white, as though some ancient dragon has exhaled across the earth. The smell is acrid, sharp in the nose, burning in the lungs. Men cough, squint, and strain to see through the choking cloud, but still they load again. Powder and ball, wadding and ramrod, priming pan and glowing cord. Always the same ritual, always repeated, while the enemy looms beyond the veil of smoke. And here, lad, is where you must understand the true genius and terror of musket warfare. A single man with a musket was slow, clumsy, and exposed, but when you gathered 100, 200, or even 1,000 men together and taught them to fire not as lone souls, but as one great beast, then you created a storm no knight could withstand. These formations were called pike and shot, a dance of weapons where long spears, pikes, kept charging cavalry at bay, while behind and between them the musketeers worked their fiery craft. One rank would step forward, unleash a volley, then kneel to reload, while the next rank raised their weapons. Like waves upon a shore, the fire rolled forward, one rank after another, each blast feeding the terror until the field was drowned in smoke. Think of the effect on the foe, lad. For centuries, knights in shining armor had ridden down men on foot, their lances shattering, their swords flashing bright. Yet now, with each volley, those same armored riders found themselves unhorsed, their plate pierced, their ranks broken by a storm of lead. The thunder of hooves could no longer match the thunder of powder. The musket, slow though it was, had changed the very balance of war. Yet do not think it was glory without fear. To stand in a line while the enemy faced you with their own muskets, that was a trial of courage. You could hear the hiss of balls whizzing past your ears, feel the dirt kick up at your feet, watch your comrade fall to the left or right, struck down by an unseen shot. And still, you were expected to hold steady, to load, to raise your musket, and to fire once more. The battlefield became a place of rhythm and patience. A man did not strike with a single blow of sword or axe. Instead, he repeated the same careful dance: measure the powder, drop the ball, ram it down, prime the pan, ready the cord, then fire into the smoke, again and again, until his powder ran dry or his courage failed him. From afar, it must have looked like a kind of terrible pageant. Lines of men disappearing into their own smoke, flashes of fire lighting up the haze, the crash of volleys rolling like thunder across the field. Generals admired the discipline, the way men moved not as individuals, but as cogs in a mighty machine. But for the poor soldier himself, it was a battle against time, against fear, and against the choking smoke that blinded him more than the enemy ever could. It was said that on a still day after the first volleys, you could hardly see a hand before your face. The field would vanish beneath a rolling fog of powder, and men would fire almost blindly, trusting in their training, praying that their shots struck true. Some believed the musket was cursed for this very reason, that the smoke itself was a demon hiding death within its folds. And yet, the musket gave common men a power once reserved for nobles. A peasant, taught the steps of loading and firing, could stand against a knight and win. It was not strength of arm, but steadiness of nerve, not noble birth, but simple training, that made a musketeer valuable. And so the world turned, lad. The age of armored lords began to wane, and the age of powder and lead began to rise. The musket did not end the sword or the pike, not yet, but it became the beating heart of armies. Its roar was the drum, its smoke the curtain, its leaden ball the equalizer between rich and poor, knight and farmer. And though it was slow, though it was dangerous, though it scarred the faces and souls of the men who bore it, it was magnificent. Remember this: a single musket may have been clumsy, a weapon that bruised the shoulder and burned the hand, but 100 muskets together were like a storm upon the earth. And when that storm rolled, few could stand before it. So when you hear the old tales of knights and banners and lances glittering in the sun, remember also the peasants with their smoke-stained faces, standing in line with their matchlocks, coughing, trembling, yet holding steady. For it was they, with powder and patience, who reshaped the very nature of battle, legacy and myths of the musket. Ah, sit down closer, child, for this is where stories grow taller than the men who lived them. The musket, you see, was more than just a clumsy tube of iron spitting fire and smoke. No, no, it was the quiet executioner of the old world, the great equalizer that dragged kings, knights, and peasants alike into the same muddy battlefield. When men first carried these matchlocks, there were whispers, whispers that they were the devil's work. Priests frowned, nobles scoffed, and knights spat in disgust. It takes no courage, they said, to kill a man hiding behind smoke with a spark and a powder charge. But the musket did not care for honor, for bloodlines, nor for codes of chivalry. It cared only for powder, lead, and steady hands. The end of chivalry. Once, long ago, knights in shining armor ruled the field. A single mounted man draped in steel could scatter dozens of farmers with sticks and pitchforks. But then came the musket. Ah, my boy, picture it, a knight charging forward, his lance lowered, his horse thundering beneath him, his armor glinting like the sun itself, only for a row of smoke-wreathed peasants to raise their matchlocks, fire in unison, and send him tumbling lifeless into the mud. Steel, for all its polish, could not withstand lead. Castles, once unshakable fortresses, crumbled beneath cannon and musket alike. In the blink of a century, the proud age of the knight faded into memory, replaced by lines of common men with fire in their hands. The myth of accuracy. Now, let us set one thing straight, eh? Many a tavern tale tells of musketeers shooting apples off heads or sniping enemies at hundreds of paces. Rubbish, I tell you. A musket was a stubborn, inaccurate thing. Hitting a target beyond 50 yards was half luck and half prayer. Most musketeers fired into clouds of smoke, hoping their lead ball found flesh somewhere inside. Battles weren't about one perfect shot. They were about thunder. Whole companies loosed their fire together, filling the air with such noise, such terror, that the enemy's heart broke before his body did. The fear they inspired, and make no mistake, lad, it was fear more than death that won battles. The musket roared like 100 storms. It belched smoke so thick, men swore demons hid inside it. Horses reared at the smell of powder. Veterans coughed their lungs black from years of breathing it in. Even if the lead ball missed you, the terror it carried rarely did. Ah, and so many tales grew around these weapons. Some claimed the smoke was cursed. Others whispered that if you loaded your musket with a silver coin, it could pierce even the thickest armor. Superstitions bloomed like weeds in the cracks of gunpowder war. The legacy of the common man. But listen close, for this is the truth, the real legacy. The musket gave the common man power. No longer was the battlefield the playground of nobles. A farmer's boy, with a matchlock pressed to his shoulder, could strike down a lord. That was the beginning of something greater than war. It was the beginning of equality in blood. From Europe to Asia, from the Ottoman Janissaries to the Spanish tercios, armies of musketeers rose. Empires were built on the thunder of matchlocks. Colonies were won, kingdoms toppled, and maps redrawn. The musket became the voice of power, and those who mastered it ruled. The romance of smoke. And yet, with all its smoke and clatter, the musket still lives in our memory with a strange kind of romance. Painters capture lines of men firing into clouds of white. Writers spin tales of brave volleys and desperate stands. And even now, you see reenactors shouldering their matchlocks, breathing in that acrid smoke, keeping the memory alive. There is something about it. The crackle of the burning match, the rolling clouds of powder, the clash of old and new that lingers in our bones. It was not just a weapon, it was a turning point, a bridge between the medieval world of knights and castles and the modern age of empires and gunpowder nations. The myths we keep. So remember, lad, if ever you hear someone speak of muskets as weak, inaccurate, or foolish, tell them this: they were not meant to be pretty. They were meant to change the world, and change it they did. They ended the night. They humbled the castle. They lifted the peasant. They gave rise to the soldier, the regiment, the empire. And though centuries have passed, though rifles and cannons and bombs have since drowned them out, the muskets still whisper in history's ear. A whisper of fire, a whisper of smoke, a whisper of the day when the common man learned to command thunder